Okay, so what if I told you that a CEO's effectiveness could be traced all the way down to the handedness of the molecules inside their brain? I know, it sounds pretty wild, but today we're going to dive into a framework that actually connects biochemistry, neuroscience, and leadership into a single coherent system. And the crazy part is, the logic behind it is surprisingly solid. Let's get into it.
I mean, it really does sound like a riddle, doesn't it? How on earth could mirror image molecules, the stuff from biochemistry class, have anything to do with learning styles or what makes a great leader? It feels like a total stretch. But trust me on this one. If you stick with it, you'll see how weaving these threads together actually reveals a powerful new way of understanding how our brains really work.
And look, this isn't just some loose metaphor. Here's the core claim, right from the source material. The argument is that all these different fields are actually governed by the exact same logic. We're talking about one unified theory here, one that connects the chemistry happening inside our neurons directly to the kind of strategic decisions we make. That is a huge claim, so let's dig in and see if it actually holds up.
So let's just cut right to the chase. Spoiler alert, the sources we're looking at today, they don't just float this idea. They state very clearly that this whole integrated model is logical, it's consistent, and it's theoretically sound. So for the rest of our time here, we're going to walk through the evidence and see exactly why this framework really does make sense.
Okay, so first things first, it's really important to get this. This framework didn't just appear out of nowhere. It's not a brand new invention. Instead, it's built by connecting a whole bunch of well-established scientific principles. Think of it more as synthesis, putting existing, solid pieces together in a new way.
And I mean, just look at the sheer breadth of research it's pulling from. You've got cognitive neuroscience, leadership function theory, systems analysis, organizational psychology. The list goes on. By standing on the shoulders of giants in all these different fields, the framework builds this incredibly strong interdisciplinary foundation.
So what's the glue holding all this together? Well, it's a concept called function theory. And the idea is actually pretty simple, but it's also really profound. Basically, any effective system, whether we're talking about a company, an ecosystem, or a human brain, it works best when every single one of its parts is optimized to do its job for the good of the whole. It's all about functional harmony.
Okay, so how does that apply to our brains? Well, it means our high-level thinking, all our brilliant ideas and complex problem-solving is only as good as our foundational processing. If the way we integrate, say, visual information and input from our other senses is optimized, then our thought processes are just more coherent, more stable, more effective. You absolutely have to get the basics right for the complex stuff to work. It's like building a skyscraper on a shaky foundation. It's just not going to end well.
And again, this isn't just speculation. The sources give a direct thumbs up. This quote right here confirms that the model, it just makes sense. It fits really well with what we already know about cognitive development, how our brains process rewards, and even more learning difficulties come from. This is a huge piece of evidence that shows the framework is, in fact, theoretically sound.
All right, so we've got the big picture theory down. Now let's zoom in on a specific mechanism inside the brain, the reward system. We're going to see what happens when those foundational functions we were just talking about start to break down.
So this framework points to some very specific issues at that foundational level. They're called vism and multis deficits. Now, in plain English, that just means there are subtle problems with how the brain is processing visual information plus motion, or how it combines input from multiple senses at once. And what's really crucial here is that these often turn out to be the hidden roots of learning challenges like stealth dyslexia or dyscalculia.
And this is where you can really see the chain reaction, the domino effect. So it starts with those foundational deficits, right? That makes it harder for the brain to recognize coherent patterns in the world around it. And here's the kicker. Our brains are actually wired with an internal reward system that gives us a little hit of satisfaction when we successfully spot structure and order. It's called a format reward. So when your pattern recognition is off, that reward signal gets weaker and weaker, and that creates cognitive stress.
All right, remember those mirror image molecules from the very beginning? Let's bring them back. The concept is called chirality, and there's a super easy way to get it. Just look at your hands. They're mirror images of each other, right? But you can't perfectly lay one on top of the other. That simple asymmetry, in biochemistry, that handedness of molecules, like the difference between an L amino acid and its D amino acid mirror image, has absolutely massive effects. So, what does the handedness of a molecule have to do with how we think? Well, the theory goes that imbalances at this super fundamental biochemical level create a kind of subtle, constant stress on the system.
And that stress can mess with neuroplasticity, our brain's ability to learn and change. And it can interfere with those exact same reward signals we were just discussing. So you've got this biochemical stress coming from the bottom up, compounding the cognitive challenges from the top down.
Okay, we've covered a ton of ground here, from grand theories to nitty-gritty neuroscience and even biochemistry. But what's the real-world takeaway? Why does any of this matter? Well, this next part connects everything we've talked about directly to the high-stakes world of leadership.
Here's the bottom line. You simply cannot separate a leader's mind from their actions. Their effectiveness, particularly in the crazy complex world we live in today, is directly tied to the health and the coherence of their foundational cognitive functions. Put simply, a coherent brain leads to coherent leadership.
So let's look at a really concrete example. The sources point to a very unique, highly structured style of reasoning. And what you're seeing here is proof that this cognitive skill isn't just some abstract concept. Nope. It is physically supported by specific networks in the brain. This is a direct, tangible connection between a cognitive style, how the brain is actually working, and in the end, leadership performance. And this leads to a really crucial takeaway. For any leader who truly wants to be effective, especially when they're operating in a chaotic, complex environment, the work doesn't start with the latest management bestseller, it starts deeper. It starts at the cognitive and biochemical level. Real, lasting effectiveness begins by correcting and optimizing your own foundational brain functions.
We have covered so much ground, from the tiniest molecules all the way up to management styles. So let's pull back one last time and just take in the big picture and see the real power of integrating all these ideas.
Honestly, if you take away just one single thing from all this, let it be this idea. This is the thesis of the entire framework boiled down. Our brains are wired to seek out structure, pattern, and fit, and we get a reward when we find it. When that structure is absent, the system feels a deficit, and it has to kick into overdrive with compensatory systems just to keep up.
So in the end, what this framework really gives us is a blueprint. It's a logically consistent and theoretically sound map that shows exactly how our most fundamental processes, everything from the handedness of a molecule to how we process light and sound, how all of it builds layer by layer to create the foundation for high-level performance.
And that leaves us with one final, pretty powerful question to think about. This model provides a blueprint for understanding and maybe even optimizing the human mind. So if we can really map the very foundations of our own cognition with this kind of detail, what else can we build? What are the limits? Something to think about. Thanks for tuning in.